Well, hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm good, Dave. Good to talk to you. Always good to talk to you, man.
Same here. So thanks for joining us on our second podcast. We have,
Best of luck with this. I think it's going to be interesting.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. This is Chris Ryan. Chris and I have met back in 1999, and which is crazy, and collaborated on a bunch of different projects in a bunch of different ways. And I would say you're probably the person I've known the longest as far as collaborating and working on creative endeavors in one form or another. So
Oh, well,
yeah,
that's.
yeah, it's great to.
I'm glad to hear that.
So yeah, so it's pretty wild. But so Chris has done a lot of stuff. He's been a actor in a bunch of our projects. He's directed his own. He's done a lot of writing, novels, scripts. He was a journalist at one point. He's
Right.
now currently a teacher. He's kind of the out of all my friends, he's probably the most to like towards a Hemingway that I know with all of his multitude of past experiences.
I
So
did do some stand up and some sketch comedy too. Yeah.
that's true. That's true. So you did that too. And yeah, and I think one of the things that I've always appreciated the most about our friendship is the fact that you and I tend to believe in getting to the same place, but how we get there is very different sometimes. We have very different ideas on how you get there. Uh,
Yeah.
which is something we'll explore a bit today. And
Cool.
it's one of the things that I've always really enjoyed about our friendship is that we do have such varying views, but that's never stopped us from A, being friends, B, being civil, or three, working together. So
Yeah.
I think that's, for me, that's, another reason why I wanted to do these podcasts was to have
Cool.
conversation with folks like yourself. So to kick off, why don't you tell us a little bit about what is your creative process?
Well, back when I was a journalist, it was, I was trained to listen really closely and get the sound of the person and get that down really quick. And when I kind of focused more on creative, it began to kind of pull from that. So when I start a story, it's always with character first, character's plot is character, and all that sort of stuff. And then the process is I'll get a couple of ideas and I might jot a little thing down. I like to use index cards. I'll talk about that in a minute. Or I might put it on that little notepad in your phone. But there's a lot of them. It's the one that haunts you, it's the one that you wake up to. It's the one that you realize you've been in the shower for 10 longer minutes, because you're thinking about this scene or that. And once the scenes start coming, I carry around index cards. And on the blank side, I'll write like a slug word, like a comedian might use to remember a bit. And on the line side, every whether it's an action or a bit of dialogue or how someone looks, whatever, and if it winds up that there's 5 or 6 or 10 cards for that scene, fine. If it's only one, that's fine. And I do it until I have too many cards, right? Way too many. And then I tend to get up before anyone else. I started doing that when I was a journalist. I was working 7 days a week, and cops would call us during the crack wars, and they'd call at 2 or 3 2 or 3 a.m. for a bust. So, I got used to a short amount of hours for sleep. And then when the kids were little, that's when we first met, I used to have to get up at 4 or 5 to write, because once they were up, that was it. So I will get up, big cup of tea and all those index cards, and then I'll play until I get them into some kind of order. And then they stay in that stack or in that little holder, and I'll go through them as that's kind of the loose outline. Mm-hmm. And from there, I build it out. So one line of note can become a whole scene. I tend to write short chapters, and I try to keep it fast-paced and with humor and heart. You do those things, you keep dancing, and maybe they stay with you. So that's the process. The other part of the process is I believe in rewriting.
Okay.
You know? Yeah.
When did you, it's one of the things I never asked you is, when did you first, like, what made you want to start writing? Like, I can look
Okay.
back on my past and I can kind of pinpoint acting and what kind of kicked off the idea of acting and directing and creating. But what about for you? Like, what was it about
Uh,
writing?
when I when I was in, I think it was seventh grade, I read S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders,
Oh, mm-hmm.
and blew the doors off. And it was so. I grew up in the Bronx, and this was in the Midwest, but it felt so close to my neighborhood, to the people I saw outside the window or when I went out, that I took the little bit of money that I had from a paper route or something and ran down to the stationery store, and I bought a notebook and a couple of pens, and I came home and I plagiarized the crap out of The Outsiders. I thought I was writing a brand new masterwork, but years later when I looked at it, it was almost beat for beat.
Yeah, Pony Boy's name was Pony Dog.
Yeah,
So
it was whatever. It was something like that. And then I had this other guy, this friend of mine, Roger. He's an amazing guy who's always read 5 to 10 books for every one book I have. And then he used to assign books to me. Like, in the 70s, that's when we were teenagers and stuff, we'd have the jeans jackets with a pocket inside, right?
Yeah.
And then we come out, and he'd come over and he goes, hey, you gotta check this out. And like it was drugs, like we were passing a nickel bag or something. He'd hand me Jack Kerouac or Kurt Vonnegut or something like that. He handed me more reading assignments than my English teachers, and he could write.
Yeah.
So like two guys who liked the same stuff and loved stories and all that stuff. We wrote a rock opera together, and then we wrote short stories because he always found everything first. He found Twilight Zone magazine and it was having a story contest. So he said, let's write stories, because we were, of course, we were professional writers by then. We were 14,
Right,
So we wrote it and we sent it in. And of course, we didn't go anywhere near winning, but a guy named Dan Simmons won, and he's still writing to this day. We still enjoy his stuff and all that. But it just it was more satisfying, even just putting a stamp on it and sending it out, than then by high school, I was writing for the school newspaper. I was writing really bad poetry for the school literary magazine, and it was just, I had asthma and allergies, so I wasn't going to be chasing down a football or anything like that. Yeah. And every spring, the planet tried to kill me with the allergies. So, what I could do was I just read stories, absorb stories, and write my spin on them. And eventually they became more and more uniquely my own.
That's interesting. It's interesting. One of the things I was talking with last week's guest, Brad, was how some people, because Brad has done tons and tons of writing as well, and he's dipped his toe into the directing world, and he's doing I think a really good job with it. But I was telling him how I am. I'm always kind of amazed at the people that can just write. They can just write and write and write and write and write. And I remember when we were working on Lock, Load, Love, which was our first official project together.
Right.
And you would write scenes, I would write scenes. From what I remember, you wrote the majority of them, but each one of these were like these horror dates. And
what Dave?
Yeah, exactly. And I remember just like I would say, all right, I was up last night and I put on some music and I wrote this scene. And it would be, 10, 15 minutes long, or 10, 15 pages, whatever, which equates to about, a minute a page. And you would say, okay, I wrote a scene too. And you would come and be like 45 pages. And I would say, oh my God, how did you write all this? And you're like, well, I just sat down and I wrote, and it always amazed me that you had that ability to just, it just came and you just wrote it.
And for what we were doing, a lot of that was overwriting. We really had to cut those things down.
Yeah.
But it comes from, I devoured comics as a kid. In those days, they were about 20 cents, right? So you get 5 for $1, and I would have $5, a week from my paper route or something, and I would buy 25 comics and read them all up, or the Phantom reprints of Doc Savage, or the Pyramid reprints of The Shadow, and whatever my old man was reading, whatever my pop was reading, the Guns of Navarone, I'd read all that stuff. One time he was reading a mafia book, and I didn't know. What did I know? So I think it was called Hitman or something like that, or Killer, something literary. And I'm 12 or something, and he finished it, put it on the shelf. No one's looking. I started reading it, and that's when I discovered gambling and hookers, and it was a revelation. Oh no, so sometimes you get yourself in trouble with that. But especially when I had paper routes, how ridiculous is this? Okay, I am fully willing to admit that I'm a ridiculous human being, but I would read the paper as I was delivering it.
Really?
And it was the Daily News, and I would read Breslin all the time, and he had such a great ear, and then the other people that I started reading as I was developing, they had great ears. Elmore Leonard, who's my guy from the Bronx, who wrote Clockers, Richard Price, great ear, and his first novels, we were still teenagers when they were coming out, The Wanderers and stuff like that. Matter of fact, my brother was in the film version of The Wanderers for 1.5 seconds. The whole neighborhood was in that movie, so you had to read the book, right? And then just hearing it, and it sounded like I could do it, and then somehow I got interested in Neil Simon, and I read a bunch of his plays, and then I read articles about him or interviews with him, and he would always run to the rewrite. He would put the show up, and he's like, I can make that better, and he'd run to the rewrite. And I love that idea, I love that idea that, working with words and that kind of stuff. And I'm still trying to get, you always try to get better at it, but it's that interplay that just lights me out,
What is it about the rewrite that you do you look forward to the rewrite? I know that
I do.
Do you? So that's something.
If I teach, right? I teach high school English, and there's very few of those kids who run to writing, but they all have to write, right? So one of my big dedicated efforts was to knock writing off its pedestal. So I would always break it down to them that it's just a matter of putting in the time, and not like years and years, but like if they played video games, the first time they played a video game, they would be terrible at it. But the 25th time, they were great at it. Same thing with cooking, same thing with, you name it, it's just, working at it. And the biggest push for me was to get them to understand that rewriting didn't mean they were making that they had made a bunch of mistakes.
All right.
It was part of the process. This year, it's Zoom, so I have to do much more visual, right? So I said, well, when you guys were getting ready for Zoom today, or when you go ready to go out, or see somebody that's going to see you, you check yourself in the mirror, and you might fix your hair or do this. That's rewrite. That's all rewrite. If we could do it in every other aspect of our lives, we shouldn't shy away from it in something that we love, people who act and then say they film act, and then they find the stage. It's a completely different experience for them, because it has to be live. In the film, you can always do another take, but they find that as they're doing that performance on stage night after night, layers are being discovered of that character, and the dedicated actor is not doing it by rote, but discovering fresh takes and nuances. That to me is the rewriting process. I'll tell you, I had a novel, my first novel I won a couple of awards with, and I just spent this summer rewriting it.
Well, which one was that?
City of Woe.
Mhm.
I took it off the market, um, and I worked with an editor, official career editor for the first time in my life, and I ran to that experience. And I never really argued a point that was made because it kept inspiring the next idea. And it's a much more fully realized, complete novel than it ever was, and shorter. In becoming more, it became shorter, which was a great discovery. So that's what that lights me up. When you were talking before about was it Lock Load Love? Sorry about that.
Mhm.
And we would do a couple of takes, and then we would talk and say, well, how about this line? How about that line? And it was because once we started seeing the interaction, you would see the possibilities, and it's that way with rewrites for me. When I want to, can I get those two characters to get to that point quicker,
Yeah.
and more realistically, or with more heart, or that kind of stuff. If you can make someone recognize the character that you recognize, with their own shading,
Mhm.
then you've completed the circle. And that's the goal of all artists. And ironically, to bring it to what this show is about, it's what's lacking in this, I think, in this country and in this culture right now. We're not willing to complete the circle. Right now, people stay in their own camps, in their own tribes, in their own sides, and in their own bubbles, because you can now feed yourself information and surround yourself with people who agree. And it's not a growth thing. You wind up shrinking that way.
Mhm.
I wrote a Simple Rebellion as another novel I wrote. It's about that. And some of the reviews were really cool. It was a complimentary review, but the review that hurt the most was they said, well, it was about Trump, and it's not. It's about the country. The country was split before Trump, and the
Mhm.
country is split after Trump. You know, um, everyone should be allowed to have different views. Everyone should be allowed to pursue their vision of America. You know, but you should be able to sit and talk about it. You should be able to learn from each other and inform your own views from a view that it's alien to yours. You
I think
know,
that kind of plays into something when we were talking about rewrites. Sometimes what you do is you submit your script, your story to your draft to a expert, and the expert is going to give you their expert opinion about what you did wrong or what you should do differently or what they personally liked.
Mhm.
Now that kind of goes into where how people are getting their information nowadays too, is that we're looking to an expert to tell us um, what the news is and how we're supposed to think and feel about something.
Right. Right.
Um, so now we take both of those things and we kind of put them together. How do you, as a creative person, when you're making something such as your script, and you
Mm.
give it to someone to get feedback on, you still have it still has to be representative of you.
Right.
Otherwise, you really can't create by committee. You can have a writing room, but you still need a head writer, right?
True.
And the same thing when it kind of comes to the news and current events, you still have to have your inner sense of what's due north.
Well, if I can, I would say that I believe anything is possible.
Mhm.
Okay. What I mean by that is I think you can make great art by yourself. I think you can make great art by committee, but everyone's got to be sharing the same vision. You know, if you bring in, you know, a story about New York City detectives possibly chasing a demon, and your editor says, well, you know, I think they should have a pet chimp, right? And then my reaction would be, where does that serve the story? It's
Hmm.
almost a religious mantra with me: serve the story, you know.
Hmm.
um, and the same thing applies to any of those situations. I mean, if you're a 24-hour news station, right, and your rundown of the news is dictated to what will keep people watching through the next commercial, they're not serving the story, they're
Yeah.
serving the money. You know, and if you're chasing the money, you're no longer a journalist, you know. And a lot of people will hate me for saying that, but across the board, I think especially the 24 news stations have lost sight of the almost holy calling of, you know, of pursuing the truth
Hmm.
as they could find. And it's now very much the dramatic story that will titillate its audience and keep them watching, and the agenda that feeds the audience. I mean, if you have a station that tends to be watched by Democrats, and you're going to run stories that is going to appeal to those Democrats, and the same thing with the Republicans, and on, right? Um, but when it's only that, because you know you want to keep them through commercial after commercial, then I mean, I don't know how many hours do you need people talking about what this person said in one day, while there's, you know, starvation over here and climate change over there, and you know there's 150 stories easy every day, and for 4 years we heard one story, and for 8 years before that we heard another story, you know. So there's no blameless, there's no sinless station as far as I'm concerned, with the possible exception of PBS, because they don't sell commercials, you
Hmm.
know. And I think that ties into audiences, especially older audiences, but audiences tending to watch longer. It becomes an indoctrination. And if you're only listening to that and only tweeting that, or watching social media of that and talking to people who agree with that, it doesn't matter what that is. It's
Yeah.
it's dangerous, you know. And I think we're in a spot right now in our history that is very similar to the years of yellow journalism and propaganda. And, you know, I thank God that we kind of sort of matured out of that for a while, you know, because it gives us hope that we can mature out of this.
I think, you know, what my big concern is that I find in we've had some script analysis is done for several of the films we have coming up.
And they
Um,
say pet monkey.
what is it? Yeah, Pet
They,
Monkey. Pet Monkey, and they live on a asteroid, you know. But and the issue that I had was that three script analysis done for the three scripts. One of them is a rewrite to a script from of a film that we made 10 years ago that you were in, and then
yeah,
the other two are brand new ideas. And the thing that bothered me about each one of those was the person's. Now we're talking the creative atmosphere, which used to be no holds, you know, no holds bar, create a character, show a character arc, show a journey. Just because you're writing it doesn't mean that you share the views of a character in your story. Um, and every single one of the ones we had, I got some problems with some of these notes because they are very, very biased. I feel like the person is just, they're not coming at it from a story perspective, they're coming at it from their own personal agenda. And you know, the first person wouldn't, she threw her grenades and then she wouldn't do a follow up. The other two, to their credit, did But my feeling is, look, if I'm paying you for this script analysis, you better get ready for a grilling, because I want to know that I can believe and trust what you're telling me. And if I
Right.
think because you have a personal issue or agenda, because you watch one of these 24-hour news cycles or whatever, um, then I'm not going to potentially torpedo a script and take all that special and unique out of it to fulfill some agenda. And one person actually went and looked at his face. Well, I should always set your Facebook profile to private. I went and I looked at his Facebook profile, and that was something. And he was getting triggered left and right when I was talking to him. So
And it's an interesting thing that I'm a geezer. I'm a little older and all that sort of stuff, right? But um, I watch the younger generation coming up. I teach the younger generation, and I watch the 20 somethings, and they're as idealistic as I am, or as I was back then, and I'm still a bit of a dreamer in that way. But um, there's a list of demands attached to it now, and of course it touches on cancel culture, but um, I think there's a danger there. I think it's healthy to try and reflect the world you're in, sure, but everybody has a story. On the podcast that I do with Alex,
what's the name of that podcast,
uh,
so I can put up a card?
cool. Tell the damn story. That's the podcast. And Tell the damn story is myself and Alex Simmons, who is an award-winning author on himself and a creator of. I mean, he's written Archie, he's written Scooby Doo, he's written all that sort of stuff. He's written a character for Batman, but his character that he created was an African American soldier of fortune from the 1930s called Blackjack. And I've written a bunch of stuff, uh, stories and stuff for Blackjack. And we were doing a thing at Bronx Community College with an up and coming media company that is African American owned and all that stuff. And one of them I have a long history with, and it was really cool. But there was one young lady there, and they were all African American, as is Alex. And we were talking about comics, and Luke Cage and the Falcon came up.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, when I was a kid, I got allergy shots every week, and I never turned into Captain America. But but I figured I had an ounce to be the Falcon, because the Falcon didn't have superpowers. So I was a huge Falcon fan. And at the time, the Luke Cage show was on. So I was saying, I'm really enjoying it. And one of the reasons I was enjoying it, left unsaid at that moment, was because they had worked out some of the overtly racist things that were in Luke Cage in the 70s, the limitations of the time, sweet Christmas and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But she turned around and looked at me with such anger and such disgust that I would dare to be a fan of those characters.
Why? What was wrong with them?
Well, because they're black and I'm not.
Okay.
So
And
I
I'm
didn't
sorry. She's black?
have African American girl, yeah.
Okay.
And the impression I got, really clear impression I got from her, was that she didn't believe that I had a right to enjoy those characters. And then that was just before appropriation started happening. And in trying to be a constant learner and all that sort of stuff, one of the episodes of Tell the Damn Story, Alex and I engaged, God bless him, he's very patient with me, engaged in a long conversation about whether or not I should be writing Blackjack.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought it was hysterical. He's like, appropriation. He says, you did your research. You worked with me and learned how Blackjack was for a decade before, I gave you the first Blackjack opportunity.
Yeah.
Remember, it was a comic strip for Mofo magazine. Okay, that was
Mhm.
bad, or it was Badass Mofo magazine. That was the name. One of my favorite clips that I ever have. And it was a 10 strip comic, and I wrote the story and all that stuff. And when I saw it in print, Alex had rewritten every bit of dialogue,
Uh,
and I was at first shocked, and then I said, "Wait, here's that Neil Simon again. I can learn from this, you know." I looked at what he did, and he knew that Blackjack wouldn't say what I had him saying. He would say this, and it was all the nuances of it, and I learned that, and then we've written a couple of we call them the rapid read series. They're kind of like modern pulps, Blackjack's adventures, and I've gotten that down. So he was saying it's not appropriation if you do the proper research, if you're not exploitive, if you're respectful and all that sort of stuff. And that is kind of what you're getting with that the editorial feedback, that there's expectations that they have that they've brought to the table before they've read a word, and if that stuff's not in there, they think that the script is wrong.
yeah. No,
you
we
know
had exactly, because I mean, we had one person who she admitted on the phone call that her own personal political views affected our score. And nothing, nothing that
were you running for office or writing a script?
well, that's the thing. Like that's the thing I feel like has gotten so crazy is that, back in the glory days of when I was being raised in the 70s and 80s, if you were a white person writing something for a black African American character, that was considered, well, that's great that you want to write that. You're not seeing any
Oh,
difference. You see a character. And then and conversely, what I always thought was great was when white people would not look at a black person writing for Captain America or Batman and have an issue with it because it's great. It's a character. It's a human being. You breathe. Well, it's a comic book human being, but it's still a human being. And our comic. It's interesting because you and I are huge comic book fans. I mean, I'm reorganizing my basement and my crawl space. I have like 10 of those huge white boxes of comic books. And, I'm like, I put them easier to get to so I can just start like grabbing
right.
them and reading it.
Grab them through 'em, yeah.
Um,
Now,
and, that's kind of our modern mythology.
one of the beauties of the art, of the genre of comic books is that you can retell with, and you can add layers of the riches, like Jack Kirby creates Black Panther, right?
Mhm.
And he has the usual cowl, right? Like Batman has, and everybody with the cutout of the jaw and the chin and the mouth. And the publisher goes, "Oh my God, you can't do that. He's black.
Mhm.
Put a full face mask on him like Spider-Man." So Jack, being Jack, he says, "All right, I'm gonna just add some stuff to the story, okay?" And because they wouldn't let him show the black skin, he created all of Wakanda, right? The most advanced civilization in the Marvel world, on the planet, right? Submariner would have some problems with that, but that's for a different episode.
Mhm.
And then he wrote it, and all that stuff, great. And then Don McGregor comes and they give him they give him Jungle Action, and they want him to do little 8-page self-contained Black Panther stories. And he says, "Let me do an ongoing story. I'm going to do a novel of comic books." And he wasn't selling that great. So sure, whatever you think will get it going. And he writes this big story that a lot of the elements that were in the first Black Panther movie came from that, right? Years later, Christopher Priest adds another layer. Ta-Nehisi Coates writes another, and there's a couple others that I'm forgetting. I'm sorry, but that's one of the beauties that they keep. You're allowed to add to it, to deepen it, to show a different side of it. Right now, Tina brought home a bunch of Thor, Goddess of Thunder, the trade paperbacks. because there seems like there's going to be an element of that in the next Thor movie, and I was interested. They used the elements that were already there to tell that story, to give a different voice. I think that's fine. I think that's great. I don't think that's appropriation. I don't think that's destroying a character. If you do it well, right? A good story well told will forgive all sins. And I think it's the same thing, you know, with appropriation. If you're doing a sloppy job on it or an ignorant job on it, yes, then you know maybe you have a reason to get some complaints. But if you've done your research and you've told your story, if you were true to your voice, and that's what should be respected. And I think that, you know, we're in such a, you know, it's so funny because of the social media monster. You get to exploit and explore nuance everywhere. So some people mistake nuance for authority. And that's where cancel culture comes from and all that stuff. And the anonymous power of the Twitter or whatever, where someone's human flaws, you know, some of them are terrible and some of them are blown out of proportion. It depends on the case, you know.
Right.
But you feed into this, again, it's the bubbles. You feed into this thing that I have a right, and then there, you know, and no, and you don't have a right to do this, or you don't have a right to be forgiven, or you don't have a right, you know. I mean, I'm not forgiving all sins, you know. There's some people who have done some horrible stuff, but I've been watching the justice system, and as flawed as that thing is too, it's taking care of a few of those people, you know.
What do you think about, because, you know, one of the main things I want to do with this podcast is kind of talking about how do you work with people who share such a different view than yourself? And along with, as you mentioned, and it's a huge portion of these podcasts, is the tribalism that we live in right now, which I really feel is where we're at. Now, I mean, one of my theories based on, you know, limited whatever, is that due to, I'm wondering if there's an inherent thing in human nature that when something new comes and we don't really know how to deal with it, we go into that animal brain of tribalism, which we need to have our tribe because our tribe will keep us safe and protected and ensure that we're housed and we eat and we know we're safe and all that stuff. And part of me feels like with social media and all this new technology that we have, we're actually kicking into a component of our brains on a behavior on a wide scale that we perhaps have never really experienced to this level.
It
So,
can be used for wondrous things, but it can also be used as a very high-tech club if you want to act like a cave person.
yeah.
You know? And I think that's the kind of stuff that it can doom us, you know. Someone turned me on to, I guess it was Roger. Roger educates me to this day. And he turned me on to a political podcast. It's hard to get a political podcast that isn't selling you one brand of politics. But there's one called I think it's called Hacks. And it's people who were in politics, like helping campaigns on different sides, you know, different parties. But they've known each other for years, and they grew up where you could be in a different party and still go out for a hamburger,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And so they talk from their perspectives about, you know, about issues. And it's sometimes it gets a little inside baseball for me, you know, but it's more satisfying to listen to that than it is to listen to a bunch of, you know, pompous jerks who are very impressed with themselves and what they've done with their careers. And they're all of the same mindset. So they're all in agreement and, you know, life's wonderful. Well, I've been out there, you know, It's a lot of awkward silences.
All right.
Yeah. A
So
lot
how
of
many?
a lot of awkward moments at the holidays. Hey, happy holidays!
Well, I think
Hey,
we've all.
not allowed to talk about anything.
No, I think we've all. I mean, I've had family unfriend me. You reach out to them to say, "Hey,
Yeah.
we're not friends. What's going on?" And they don't even get back to you. They don't even want the conversation. I think in a lot of cases, what that is somebody scrolling through a feed late at night, and the little bed bug crawls up their back end, and they get irritated, and before they go to sleep they just unfriend, or they do this or they do that or whatever. And then when they get called out on it, they feel uncomfortable. Now, you
I've
know,
I've done it twice, and you asked before if there was any before the show, if there's anything I didn't want to talk about. I'll talk about these two things, and they might be embarrassing to me, but I'll I'll show my trigger, right? Um, my own brother called me commie pinko fag for one of my beliefs, and I unfriended him and I blocked him and all that sort of stuff. Um, this is ridiculous, but my post was not to talk to him about, but I got a meme from The Godfather,
uh-huh.
and it said, "Fredo, I love you, but never take sides against the family again."
Mm-hmm.
Because he said that in a very public forum,
Right.
about something that he could have called me up and talked to me about, or this or that. And this last Thanksgiving, this was a couple of years. This last Thanksgiving, I really put a conscious effort into just making small talk,
Yeah.
and we kind of got into politics, and I talked about, in positive ways that, whatever you think about the results of the election, it actually is opportunities on all sides to refresh and renew and rebuild, a bigger, better party on each side, including the small, I'm not someone who goes for the far left or the far right. I think there's a reason that's far. I'm more of a centrist, but there's a, center left and a center right could potentially grow very strong right now, if they chose to. And this was as close as we had gotten to a civil conversation. But since I unfriended him, and another time,
Now, did he ever say to you, like, "I know you unfriended me"?
oh, sure. Well, he went on. I mean, everybody we know told me, because he went on the social media where he had called me a commie pinko fag, and he had said, "My brother just unfriended me just because I called him a commie pinko fag," or something like that. And none of those words seemed to register as being offensive. And it's the generation, it's a whatever. And if in a moment of clarity he would say, "I didn't mean a real commie, and I didn't mean a real pinko, and I definitely didn't mean, the derogatory of fag," as if he was would be referring to English slang for cigarettes. That's really, he was just using an old Archie Bunker kind of phrase to put me in my place, because he didn't agree with whatever stupid post I had put up, right? And it triggered me. I was like, who's he to do this in public?
Right.
I think that people forget how social media is. You can speak privately, and you can speak, that's a really public thing. And another person offered to teach me how to be an ally.